This one is teaching called Overcoming Grief, or Overcoming Grief and Loss, because that's something we do in Fresh Start, is dealing with loss issues, issues of loss in whatever way they are. And so I first want to point this out to you. If you're relatively new, we got a bunch over here. If you're relatively new to Fresh Start, and you've maybe never opened up a green book, or maybe you've just dealt with unforgiveness issues, and you haven't stepped into dealing with some losses. One of the three key things we try to hit on resolve. Anybody else need a handout? We're all good. All right, Evan will put them right there in the back, and somebody can grab them if they come in. But one of the things that you look at in part 1 of the green book here, on the first section there, it has you on one side list your offenses, hurts, and wounds that are unresolved. And the other side, it has you list losses. And the enemy really could care less what we struggle with. He's just gonna hone in on it. He's gonna, when you have a bruise or you have a wounded arm. Pastor Jeremy has a wounded arm, so you're highly sensitive to that area, obviously, because it hurts. And so the enemy's that mean college buddy that pokes the bruise, that squeezes the arm. Harry over there just had surgery. If we were in college together, I'm just telling you, I remember me. I'd have squeezed his arm. That was me. I was that guy. And then I'd be like, it'd cost you $1 for me not to squeeze your arm next time. I was that guy. Well, the enemy, he's just ruthless. And so you have a loss, and he's gonna push that. It's a bruise in your soul, and he pushes it. And he says, "Oh yeah, your dad abandoned you? You don't have a dad, do you?" And he pokes that. And then you're going through life, and you see a father and a son play, and they're like, "Your dad never played with you because he abandoned you, right?" You see, go to graduation for your nephew, and you see all these dads, and he's like, "Yeah, your dad never even came to see. You're going to see your nephew graduate, and your dad wasn't even around to see you graduate." That's what he does. And so if we don't process this stuff properly and walk it through, the enemy's going to have just an opportunity to cause pain your entire life. And if you walk it through and it is dealt with, and you just completely are set free from it, and then you release it to God in the proper way, and you're set free. When he pokes, it's like, the first few times you might be like, "Yeah, ow." But, the bruise is getting smaller. That happened, but okay. And then he pushes again. You're like, "Dude, you're just pushing rock hard muscle, because that's all it is now. I am free." And then he's like, "No." But he's never going to let up. What happens is, as we live our lives according to James 4:7, and we submit to God, we deal with stuff, submitting to God, and it helps us to resist the enemy. And then it says, what? If we submit to God and resist the enemy, what does it say he does? He flees. Does he walk away quietly? He flees. He runs away screaming. He has a fit. He can't handle the fact that you are free and you're better than you once were. And that's what I love about seeing people overcome grief and loss, because those things can be so debilitating. Depression comes with them so often. This sadness of the soul, this torment, this hopelessness comes so often with grief and loss. And when we're set free from it, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. We don't live in this weird world that says, "Oh, it didn't really happen." It happened, but we're free from it. And so some of this, originally Rick Bonnet, because he worked a lot with people who dealt with the grief and loss, and he ministered a lot to them. He and I just over a course of a few months, just talking and thinking and throwing some ideas out, he came up with this teaching. And then, I just added in some thoughts and some stuff I'd walked through. Rick dealt a lot with people who had grief and loss, and then I, as one, I buried my first son, and so that was just I buried my dad. And it was a loss based on something that was never resolved. And then I buried my son, and it was a loss of a lot of things, hope being a big part of that. So there's just parts of this that I said, "Hey, Rick, what about this?" And he's like, "Yeah, I deal with that a lot." And so that's what this came out of. And more than anything, what our goal was is to help people see a pattern you can go by. And we're not saying if you don't do every step perfectly, you're just not going to get free. It's not about that. But this is a pattern to take and walk out of and come to this place where we're set free, where we're living free. And one of the things I tell people all the time, and being a pastor who I do funerals, and so I help families walk through the grief of it all, and nothing is ever, A, B, C, D, and you do this and you're done, and, hope it's 3.5 weeks, because it shouldn't be more than that. It's never that. Every situation's unique, but in that, I just tell people, you got to grieve. Don't get stuck in the process. Hope is there, and it will show itself very evidently down the road. Even if you don't feel like it's there now, if you're letting God have access to you, it's there, whether you feel it or not. And there will be a day when this is not debilitating to you. There just will be. And for some it is divorce, and some it's abandonment, and some it's death, some it's a death of a dream, health. Those are probably some of the biggest losses you're going to have, and undealt with, it will always have a level of debilitating, factor in your life. Dealt with, it'll just be less and less. I mean, the reality is, the July 11th every year, I remember that as the day my son died. But July 11th, year one, the first anniversary, I didn't even get out of bed. Didn't get out of bed. I think I did my usual get up and go get a Dr. Pepper at Sonic and my jar of pickled okra, because that was my remedy. I don't know why, but I ate a whole bottle of pickled okras and a whole jar, and then I drank a Dr. Pepper, a large one from Sonic, and then I just stared at the wall. And so that's probably the only thing I did that day. Year two, because I had gone through a large measure of healing in my life, it was painful. And it was like, oh, and I was like, but I don't feel like killing myself today. Year three, and then, and all these years later, I remember it because I have memory. He doesn't say, hey, deal with this and you'll never think of it again. We're made with memory. So if you had a divorce and it's been 12 years, but you've been free for the last 5, when your anniversary comes around and you remember it, and maybe you feel slightly melancholy, do not think that you've lost the battle. Do not buy into the lie that, man, you're a loser still. You just have memory and you have a heart, for goodness sake. But it's not debilitating to you. It doesn't keep you from getting out of bed. It doesn't sting you. It doesn't cause you to want to stop at the mugshot all day. That's when you can look at it and go, you know what? I think one day I'll be here. Right now I'm here, but I'm not there anymore. Jesus, thank you. And the enemy's like, and he runs out screaming, fleeing, because you have lived your life, James 4:7, and that's good news. So we have this passage here, right up there, Hebrews 4:14 through 16, one of my favorite passages. Wampa asked us the other day as pastors to give him our favorite 3 passages or quotes, and this was verse 16 was one of my favorites, and one of my 2 favorites probably. And it says this, so then, since we have a great high priest who has entered heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe. The high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all of the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. So don't bypass that too quickly. He understands our weaknesses. He gets us, and he's not mad about it. Don't think that because when you think, oh, he knows everything that I'm dealing with, he knows all my weaknesses, don't think that means he's mad at you or frustrated at you or, oh, my goodness, I remember Doug's weaknesses again. He doesn't. He doesn't think that way. And then it says, he faced all the same testings we do. I'll just tell you, as a human being, I'm like, did you really? Come on. I know you're not going to lie. I know that. Come on, really? I mean, I didn't face what you faced. I didn't have to hang on a cross. But did you really face this? You didn't bury a son, Jesus. I mean, I've had those conversations. And, again, he knows my weaknesses. He knows I'm skeptical. So he's like, Scott, You're such a knucklehead, and I love you for it. And I'm going to get you over your skepticism, and in the midst of it, show you that I did face all the same testings you did. Except read that next line, Scott. I did not sin. Okay. But this is my favorite part. This is my favorite part. So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy, unmerited favor, undeserved giving to us of everything we need. And we will find grace to help us when we need it most. Every time you need grace is when you need it most. It's not a one-time shot. You don't get your one card that says, here's your grace most card, and you get to use it, Chad, whenever you'd like, but I get it, and you don't get it back. And there, you can enter a raffle later and get another one maybe, but it's every time you need grace, you find it. It's because every time I need it most right then. And he says, Scott, you can boldly come before your gracious God, which is your dad, and you'll find unmerited favor from me. I'll always lavish you with my love and my favor and my grace and the things you need. And whatever you need, I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to give you exactly what you need when you need it every time you come to me. So all you need to do, Doug Boyts, is continue to go to him. That's it. That's the only caveat. The only thing, if you want the grace that you need to live and to deal with things, all you got to do is go. Wouldn't that be cool if whenever you had a bill to pay, Wells Fargo was like, yeah, whenever you need it, just walk in the building. And I'll give you, if you need 100 that day, you got 100. If you need 100,000 because you just want to finish paying off that house, you just ask. Can you imagine? That'd be awesome. And that's what he's saying. Whatever you need, at that moment, you come and ask. All you have to do is walk in. That's what he's talking about. The definition for grief, Rick did the studying here in the Hebrew and the Greek and put it in English for us. It's sorrow, pain, both physical and emotional, afflicted, sickness, heaviness in thought. So up here, just this heaviness, wet blanket thoughts. Bitterness in your mind, tottering or swaying in thought and mind, to mourn, to sigh within. And we've all sighed before. You're just like, and what grief is just constant, and that's just this hopelessness. It's just this, I got nothing. That's what grief is and tells us and wants to be for us. And the enemy's like, oh yeah, make him sigh. And so we have to look at that and go, okay, is there a part of me, have I dealt with everything that involves loss in my life that has caused that for me? And maybe you're like, no, I haven't, so I'm going to walk this out. Maybe you're like, I don't know if I have. And you read this definition, and you're like, yeah, I got some bitterness in my mind. There's a lot of heaviness of my thought. I just constantly am heavy and depressed. I sigh in my soul all day long. I'm just lovingly telling you, you got grief to deal with. And that's okay, because you can be set free. Sources of grief and loss, we'll just run through these quickly. But I want you to look at these, and you can ask any questions you have at all. If there's something not listed, you might be like, what is that? Or any question you have, just ask, because this outline is here for us to go home with. If we don't finish it because we interact a lot, that's cool. But I just want us to be able to look at it and go, yeah, I relate to this one and sort of that one. But death or loss of a loved one. Anyone in here ever lose a loved one? Anyone ever bury a child? I know Richard and Gloria's story. He was 22? Was he 22? I mean, my son was like 10 minutes old, 5 minutes old. I can't imagine that pain. But here they are, free, smiling, great countenances, but it still happened. But you're not bound by it anymore, but they had to walk that through. Anybody ever bury your parents? I mean, inevitably, as your parents get older, most of us are probably going to bury our parents. We probably just are. unless they are just like amazingly healthy or we die younger. I buried my dad, and it was painful. And we didn't even really get along that well at the time. Great fond memories now that I'm free and healed. But at the time, it was just brokenness, and I still grieved that. Unprocessed or unresolved trauma, traumatic things that happen that, a car wreck that just changes everything, loss of a job that makes you lose everything, health issue. I mean, these traumatic things that wake up and all you find is a note saying, I'm out. Took off with my secretary and we're gone. Trauma. Prolonged or chronic illness. I mean, that's huge. It's it's painful. It just, not only is it physically painful, but it just feels so hopeless when you suffer with it for so long. You have some kind of disease or symptom that just never seems to have a chance to be healed, and you just have to deal with that. Or maybe it's a loved one that you've been so close to that had to deal with it. I prayed with the gentleman over this past week who said goodbye to his daughter not too long ago who had lupus. And it was painful. She's 28. It wasn't a shocker that she had lupus, but it was finally over, and it's just the sadness of his soul. And he's like, my baby's gone, and she's gone. And it wasn't like he didn't think that was the most likely thing that's going to happen somewhere along the way, but it still happened. It's grief. And what's so cool, we prayed, and I felt I had a word, and just prayed for him, and just blessed him, and I've seen him a number of times since then, and the Holy Spirit has changed his countenance. That still happened. He still has to walk it out in fullness, but his countenance he beelines it for people to shake their hand and greet him and say, hey, how are you? That is only the miracle-working power of Jesus. The Holy Spirit saying, I can heal your soul, son. I don't care how young or old you are. Severed relationships. Anybody have a severed relationship that was grieving? Almost did, but Jesus saved us. Whew. But I get it. Disappointment or regrets in relationships. Things that happen that you're like, man, I was really dumb. Or, man, he was really dumb. Or whatever it was, but it severed something that may or may not ever return. That's grieving. Loss of a dream or a hope. Anybody ever have a loss of a dream? Like you just had this dream. You're like, that's what's going to happen, and then it just didn't. And sometimes it just kind of hangs on like in the distance. You're like, maybe I can get to it. And so then it's just this hope that seems to never even get close enough to reach. Or sometimes it's just loss of a dream, and you're like, oh, I know it's over. It's just over, and it never will be. Pressure of life, just pressure. Just heavy pressure that just grieves you. Chronic negative patterns of thought. We're just like the definition. We're heaviness in thought or bitterness in mind, or this sigh within that just runs around our brain, and it's just grieving. And maybe it's something even you've done. Anybody ever do something? You're the one that did something, and you can't get over the grieving that you caused or that you've done. That's hard. And the enemy loves. He's like, you're the loser. You're the pain giver. You're the reason they're all struggling. And he's just going to be like poking and poking. And the only way out is to take it to the Lord and say, heal me, please. Otherwise, if you just try to do mind over matter, the enemy's like, I don't mind that you think that matters. I'm going to crush your soul. So we have to properly lay it under the blood. Part B there says, fruits of unresolved grief and loss. Number one, wasting away in body and soul. King David is just a great writer and had the ability to say things, what was he, about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago? Had the ability to say things that we're still like, oh yeah. I mean, it's pretty cool. A dude who wrote in a different language, from a different time, in a different culture, and he writes stuff and he's like, oh man, that's exactly what I feel right now. It's pretty cool. He says this, have mercy on me, O Lord, for I'm in distress. This is Psalm 31, 9 through 10. Tears blur my eyes. My body and soul are withering away. I am dying from grief. My years are shortened by sadness. Sin has drained my strength. I am wasting away from within. Sounds so happy. I mean, anybody ever feel like any part or the fullness of what he just wrote there? Yeah. I think he really felt that, but I think the Holy Spirit was saying, man, I've got I've got this many thousands of years of kids that I need to walk out of that, so I'm going to let them know I get them. Psalm 6, verse 7 says, my vision is blurred from grief. In other words, I can't see or think straight. It's just blurred. You know, for me, when Josiah died, and then I just realized he's not going to come back to life. The Lord's not going to revive him and bring him back to me. I was just dead inside. For me, I was just dead inside. I was like shocked and dead at the same time. And it was like, wow, you really didn't heal him. You really didn't. You really didn't come through like I know you can, but I guess you don't have to. I mean, I was just kind of like, There's a big sigh within. And then it went from this dead inside to just this every waking moment of sadness. Every waking moment that I wasn't consumed with doing something to keep my mind off it. It was just sorrow. Somebody's texting me. There was just this pain in my soul. And then, over time, because I was like, well, I guess I'll just be this way forever. All right. I mean, I just bought into that. I remember being pain-free because I just said, if I'm just dead can't feel anything. So I was almost in an awkward, diabolical way excited to be dead inside for the rest of my life. Because if I'm dead, I can't feel anything and no one can ever touch me. So I will just be the living dead. So that's what I chose to do. So that's when I refer to it in my story as our dark year, our year of darkness or whatever it is. One of us refers to it one way and one the other. But we had that year of just darkness, and that's where I lived. I was a zombie. It was just a mess. My perception was distorted, like it says there in number 2. I had no outlook, actually. I guess it's distorted with nothingness. But I just really believed my lot in life is losing things because Sarah, her parents had divorced, and then, my dad died, and then Josiah dies, and then my best friend drops dead, and I'm like, well, the only way to get over this loss affecting me is just to be dead. And then you can't touch me. No one can touch me. And so I resigned myself to that. And that's where the enemy wants us. He wants to get us there into this dead zone. But he doesn't leave us there. He just is like, now that you're just stumbling along, I'm going to beat the tar out of you with lies and life and stuff. And it's like, wow, you don't even let up on me. Psalm 77, verses 2 through 10. I won't read the whole thing, but part of it says this. When I was in trouble, I searched for the Lord, but my soul was not comforted. I think of God, and I moan, longing for his help. You don't let me sleep. I'm too distressed to even pray. I think of the good old days when my nights were filled with joyful songs. Has the Lord rejected me forever? Will he ever be kind to me again? Have his promises permanently failed my life? Has God forgotten to be gracious to me? I would say this is my fate. I mean, if I could have pinned that, I would have. I read that a few years ago, and I was like, it's exactly what I thought back then. Even looking at my journals, I have this one journal that I keep it because partly it makes me laugh. But it is the most morbidly dark journal. I'd have been a great poet, like T.S. Eliot or some of those just horrifically dark ones where you read them and then you just want to just fall off a cliff. The whole thing was full. It was during that period of time, and it was just all darkness and doom. And I was like, that's exactly what that journal's like. It's just full of darkness and sadness. This is my fate. He says, this is my fate. I believed up here. This is my lot in life, to have loss. Doug gets this, and Jeremy gets that, and Gary gets this, and to even it all out, I get to lose. Because you got to have enough success and enough failure and enough gain and enough loss. That was what I believed. And I believe, well, I guess God, whether I ticked you off or you just don't care, I'm your lost guy. And then you get to pour it out on Greg Ravencraft, and he gets it all good. And that's what I believed. You know, the story of Job is obviously a famous one. And we understand that he went through losses that probably none of us will ever go through. And I pray no one that I ever know or know of has to go through that. And I bless God that the oldest book in the Bible was probably one of the most horrific stories, but we get great things out of it. But, you know, for Job, he'd lost everything. And then on top of that, he has these boils that are almost unbearable to deal with. So it's like he loses everything, everyone dies, and he's got these massive, horrific boils. And so his friends come to be with him. And initially, his friends really had good intentions. We kind of hear about all the negatives, but initially they did what they call sitting Shiva, which they just sat with him and they wept with him. And they didn't say anything. Their problem was when they finally, I guess, got tired of sitting, they're like, we need to say something now. And then there's all downhill from there. But initially, you know, they sat with him. And then they started to question the character of God. And so Job started to question the character of God. And then they began to accuse Job and blame him. It must be you. You must stink, or you must have ticked him off somehow, or, you know, you had to have done something. Come on. We all know you're righteous Job, but some had to be hidden, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And it ends with this dread of life. You know, that's what they kind of concluded. It's just dread. Only trouble comes when Job enters the room. That's kind of where his friends went from coming for however far away they were, and they just sat around and wept with him, to, yeah, you bring all sorts of dread upon us, you know. Thoughts of death, and he's thinking, I might as well take me away. And then this ultimate desire, I wish I just never had been born. Anyone ever say that in here? I remember when I got past the point of wanting to pull the trigger myself, I was like, okay, Lord, I won't do that, and it probably would hurt. I don't like pain, so that helped me a little bit. But then I came to this place, I was like, you know what? I just know it's better on earth if I'm just not here. I get that my mom will be sad, but she'll be okay over time, and no one else will care. So it really would. I'd had these conversations with God for weeks. It'd just be best if you could just take me away. No pain involved. It'd be awesome. No pulling the trigger because, you know, what if something goes wrong and then I got that? Or, you know, my mom would have to deal with that. So just if you could just have me die in my sleep, it'd be awesome. Just take me away. And I would beg him to do that. And he never talked back to me. Never was like, dummy, or no, or Scott. I didn't hear anything. And I was like, maybe he's contemplating it, you know. And I had a twisted view of God. But I had that thought of, it'd just be better if I wasn't here. So please just take me away. And ultimately, God, in that gracious Father heart, he's like, Scott, I will not lose you. I made you, and I had my son die for you, and I've always wanted you, so why in the world would I end you? Because I'm going to be glorified in your redemption and in your return, or your turning to finally living what is meant to be. And that's a part of the grand scheme that we don't always see, and I get that we don't always see it, of walking out of grief, is he will be glorified in it. And that's good news. He wants to be glorified where the enemy longs for attention. The enemy wants to be known as the one who wreaks havoc in Jeremy Cotton's life. And God's saying, no, I'm going to walk him through this, and then I'll be glorified, and he'll be defeated one more time. But I'm going to be glorified in the midst of this. And I know if God had said, no, Scott, I can't take you away because I need to be glorified in your healing, I'd have been like, well, I'm never going to get healed, so that's just a dumb thing. You know? But so even just dealing with logic with me wasn't going to work. He was working things to captivate my heart and bring me to him. But it was tough. Number 3 there says, unable to receive forgiveness and hold on to regrets. That's tough to even realize that I'm forgiven, because we want to live in that, we want to wallow in that depression, in that woe is me place. We want to hold on to the regrets because at least it's something. At least it's something. This grief, this loss, this pain that I have, this badge of death that I carry, at least I have that. And if I am forgiven, I got to stop holding on to that, and I have to face stuff. And I don't think I have the ability. That was probably one of my biggest things. I was like, if I just died, I don't have to face all the problems I caused. Because I was like, there's just so many. And I think I'll die from having to deal with them all. So might as well just kill me now. And that's where I was. And the cool thing is, anything he asks us to do, he's going to give us the courage and the ability to do it. He's going to gather great people around us. I mean, you just look around this room, and I don't care what you're going through, but in this room, there are warriors and friends and mentors and counselors that will stand with you and walk with you and carry you across places if you'll just let them. And I never would have guessed anyone would come to my rescue, but he sent people to my rescue in different fashions and different forms. People that set things up for us to get to Omaha, and then this couple that were pastors in a church of 4,000 that said, we'll take you. I'm like, you don't even know me. And they jumped in the water as life preservers when I didn't even want to grab a hold of the life preserver. And they were the personification of a life preserver for me. And so they're just still some of my favorite people on the planet, because they just did that for me. And it's because God said, would you do that for Scott, Steve? Would you do that for Scott and Sarah, Steve and Mindy? And they did it. And there are people in this room that will rally to you, to your side. You know, I love watching epic movies, and this battle's happening, and it just seems like, oh, doom is coming, and the king is down to his last 5 men, and then all of a sudden somebody breaks through, and it's like, rally to the king. And I think in heaven, God's going, if you'll just turn to me, Daryl Clemens, if you'll just say, yes, I'll send out the battle cry, rally to my son. Rally to my son, and people will just go. And you've seen it. You've lived it. I've watched you choose to live it and to say, help me, and then people rally. And they didn't rally because he's just some awesome dude. They rally because God said, rally to my son. And he'll do that. But you got to be able to receive forgiveness and let go of those regrets. You know, Genesis 45 is telling the story there of Joseph coming into contact with his brothers again, and he's like, it's really me. And they're like, uh-oh, oh, now our heads are going to leave, and our bodies are going to stay. You know, that's what they're dealing with. And they had this terrible fear of what's going to come, what's going to happen to us, because we wanted him dead, and we sold him so he could be, and now he has a sword, and he can lop our heads off. They weren't thinking receiving forgiveness and letting go of the past. They were thinking, man, this is too much. But Joseph was operating in the realm of being a Christ-like figure in that moment. So what are examples of how to respond to grief and loss? This is where we begin to step out of it and into life, into that place where God gets the glory. Integrity and forgiveness is the first one. For me, I had to open this up and walk it through. And I didn't even walk it through greatly the first time. Because when I got to you've heard my story. I got to the part about Thanksgiving, about giving thanks. And I was like, oh, I'm going to skip over that part because that's stupid. So I just did. I skipped over it. And it made sense to me to skip over it. Why would anybody in their right mind be thankful their son's dead? That's stupid. Obviously, you don't mean that, Jesus, so I'll help you out here. So I did that. And then a little over a year later, year and a half later, he brings me back to that place. He's like, I want you to teach tonight. It was a fresh start. It was a Friday, and he's like, on Monday, I want you to teach on giving thanks. I'm like, okay, I love that part. And I want you to use Josiah. I'm like, oh, that's stupid. I never did it. Disagree with you. So we're at an impasse. The teacher and the God are at an impasse, you know. And guess who won? But I still have my head. But he was very clear. He's like, oh, I know. And so between now and Monday, you have to walk that through. I'm like, oh, you're sneaky. That's a good way to get me to do it, but I disagree, so we're stuck again. And he's like, yeah, if you can't do this, Scott, you're always going to have a measure of grief that lives in you and a measure of pride you live by because you're in charge, not me. And I'm like, wow, I'm right, though. So, and I walked it through in humility. I did. I was like, well, you got to break me because I don't get it. It sounds dumb to me. But I walked it through. And that's when he brought me to that revelation that if I had not lost Josiah, I never would have been broken in the same manner. Thus, I never would have had a son, because I had Zion. He was a few months old at the time. I never would have had a son to be a healed dad to. And I never would have I wouldn't have been a husband anymore because that would have been over. So he brought me, just in this course of this time, he brought me to this revelation. Scott, if Josiah hadn't died, you wouldn't be a whole husband and a whole dad living in freedom and healing. And I said, yeah, I agree. The death of my son brought me to the heart of my father. And so, yes, I'd want to have Josiah here, but at the same time, I wouldn't trade it for anything because I'm free and whole, and Zion gets a whole dad. I walked in the integrity of him being right and me just joining in with that. You know, going back to the story of Joseph, I mean, he had to be sad. He had to be broken. It's his brothers. They sold him, and now he's facing him after all these years. But his response was to work through it all and forgive them. I can't. It doesn't tell us exactly. We don't get all of it in his story and what he did, but I can't imagine him being elevated to such a place of integrity and authority and responsibility and the blessing that came to an entire nation. I can't imagine him being risen to that by God if he had lived in bitterness. It just doesn't make sense. So he had to, somewhere along the way, put it under the blood and forgive his brothers. Or else he would have just been this bitter creature, and God would not have honored that. Because he was honored in spite of everything against him. I mean, he was a slave, for goodness sake, and then he's like the number 2 man in the whole nation, but he ran the whole nation in this foreign nation where he was a slave originally. So that without being set free, he could not have gone there. So he had to, along the way, deal with that bitterness and that unforgiveness to become such a man of integrity. Because forgiveness will always set you and I up for success. Always. Forgiveness always sets you up for success. Always. Always. It's good to do. That's why I love the Green Book. It's just healthy all the time. Second one there says, get up and get busy with the Lord. And then I was like, well, Rick, put and for the Lord. So in my own notes, I put and for the Lord. But I love the passage there in Samuel where it's talking to Samuel in 1 Samuel 16:1, and he was lamenting over Saul being a sorry person and a sorry king. And God says to him very clearly, you've mourned long enough for Saul. That time is over. You have to live because I've given you a purpose and I've given you a role to play in the lives of people. And if you just remain here mourning over this man who it's a done deal now, you're never going to fulfill your purpose I have for you. And then all these people are going to miss out on this. So you've mourned long enough. Let's move forward. So there is a point where we have to move forward, and that's why we push these things like they're hot potatoes, man, for tomorrow. It's the best thing to buy because it helps you get up and get busy for the Lord and walk stuff through. Number 3, allow yourself to grieve. I mean, it hurts. You're really sad. You have to walk it through, so don't pretend you don't, and don't believe the lies that say, oh, you shouldn't be grieving. I mean, the Israelites were so bad at it that God had to give them actual specific mandates for how to grieve. He did. He's like, you do this for this long and this for this long. You wear this, you eat this, you do this, and then you're done. We're humans. There's certain things we're not that great at. And so God says, yeah, you got to grieve. Then we don't operate by the specific mandates anymore like the Israelites, but we do have to grieve. We do have to walk it through. We do have to let it happen, walk it through, and go somewhere with it and be set free from it. But don't just stuff it down and say, well, I'm a Christian, I shouldn't feel bad. If you bury somebody you love, I hope you feel. that's being human being. That's being a Christian, is feeling. Feeling. And so don't, and the enemy will say, you don't have much hope, do you? Because you feel sad. Isn't your God supposed to be this God of, joy? And if you're sad, then you don't have hope. You're not a good Christian. He'll just work every angle, so just don't. He doesn't need to be speaking right then. Just grab and toss, and hey, I got to walk this through, but I'm not going to get stuck here. Nehemiah 1, verses 1 through 11, you have this story, and the news comes that how bad it had been, that how bad Jerusalem was, and it says that Nehemiah sat down and he wept at the news, because that's his city. But then it says he stepped into this righteous place of grieving, that even while still feeling sad and grieving about it and not being totally done, he began to move into this place of, there's a plan. God, give me a plan that I'll carry out whatever you want me to do. I'll do whatever part that is. If I have to lead it, I'll lead it. And he did. But God gave him a plan, and this is what he chose to do. He turned to the Lord during this process. He recalled and he rehearsed God's nature and promises. He repented in areas of failure for himself and for the nation. He didn't allow self-pity and accusation to be entertained. He chose to not let those be a part of his life. Self-pity, and then the accusation that came as they stepped into rebuilding the wall. And then it says that he helped the people receive forgiveness for just the sins of their nation. But he walked it through. He was practical in that. He did something. He got up after the mourning period, and then he did something even in the midst of not feeling. He wasn't like he went and was like, hey, it's all hunky-dory now. Hunky-dory, do they even say that? I don't even know if anybody says that. I don't know if anybody said that after my grandmother died, but I just did. I'm reviving it. But he didn't. He's like, okay, I still feel this, and the wall is still down, and the city's still in ruins, and it's still pretty much a shambles. So I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but I'm going to do something. We're going to go somewhere. That's why I love these. You're going somewhere, and you can walk this through in faith, knowing at the end, when I release it to the Lord, and when I turn it over to Him, and when I say, Lord, I don't want to hold on to this grief any longer. I don't want to bear this loss in my soul any longer. I'm believing for you to do some form of miracle, whether I feel it or whether I just know it. You're going to do something in me. That's really what Nehemiah was doing. This action is going to take us somewhere. If I'm the one that helps to see it happen and be complete, praise God. If I'm just a part of it, praise God. But I'm going to move forward. Practical steps to grieving. Number one, grief and loss are a part of this world. Sin entered the world. The way it was meant to be was broken. Jesus had a better plan, came and redeemed it all, but we still live in this redeemed world that we can live in because of Jesus. It's still broken. So that stuff happens. Ecclesiastes 3:4 says there's a time to cry and a time to grieve. It tells us all these different things, the good and the bad, but it tells us there's a time to cry, there's a time to grieve. And I think the part B there is so important. Each time it should be treated like a season, not eternity. What we go through grieving is not for the rest of our life, and it's not meant to be for the rest of our life. And if you resign yourself to the fact that it is, to the belief that it is, you need to get some prayer, and you need to get, in essence, the Lord to nudge the record player and get off that broken spot, that repetitive spot, because you're believing a lie. And you know what? I get it. Most people that pray for you will absolutely get it. I get that you believe that. I get where you've landed and what you've bought into, whether it's deception or just hopelessness or a combo. But let's pray and see that broken, the back of that thing broken, and then walk out of that. Number 2 is my favorite. Jesus has been there and done that. John 11:34-35 tells us the story of Lazarus, friend of the family, friend of Jesus. He had deep friendships on planet Earth. He was broken and he wept for Lazarus. He understands. I want to read this passage from verse 33 to 39 actually for you. It says, when Jesus saw her, one of the sisters, weeping and saw the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up within him. And he was deeply troubled. Don't miss that. A deep anger welled up within him, and he's deeply troubled when he saw the effect of death on people he loved. Because they lost Lazarus, and he was very beloved in that place too. So it wasn't just his family. And he said, "Where have you put him?" he asked. They told him, "Lord, come and see." Then it says a famous passage. He says, they told him, "Lord, come and see." And it says, then Jesus wept. The people who were standing nearby said, "See how much he loved him?" But some said, "This man healed a blind man. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying?" His death wasn't the point. The fact that he specifically, as a human being, as one person, wasn't the point that caused his death. The reason Jesus wept was because it's not the way it was meant to be at the beginning when he created planet Earth and when he created us. Death was never supposed to be a part of it. And so he's weeping over the fact that it wasn't meant to be, and the ones he loves the most, us human beings, we're the most cherished creation, that we were never supposed to feel this loss. And it broke him inside. And it says in verse 38, Jesus was still angry when he arrived at the tomb. A cave with a stone rolled across its entrance. Roll the stone aside, Jesus told him. You see, Jesus really does get us. Things that were never meant to be make him feel. He was angry at sin. He was angry at what the enemy had done to the ones he loves the most. And it troubled him, and it caused him to weep because he loves us that much. He knew he's calling Lazarus out of the tomb. That wasn't even the point. He knew in just a few moments, I'm going to call this smelly dude out of the tomb. I mean, they were all like, you know how bad he smells? It's been 4 days in there, man. And that was one of the sisters was like, oh, hope you got nose plugs. But he knew, I'm calling him into life again. So that he wasn't crying about Lazarus. He was crying for all of us because he gets us. That's what the passage in Hebrews is all about. He gets us. He understands our weaknesses. He faced all the same testings we do, yet he didn't sin. So we'll find grace, or we'll find hope, or we'll find help when we need it the most. That's what I love about my Jesus. When I think of he's been there and he's done that, and I even think back because I know it wasn't the same then for me. But I watched the video of my son's time as we buried him, put him in the ground, and then the service that we had for him. We were in England at the time, and even my friend Trey, who did the service, he used this passage here where Jesus wept, and I watched that, and I'm like, you were there, and I think you were weeping with me. I would say you were, because I mattered. Because Josiah, it wasn't even a worry thing anymore. He's with my Heavenly Father. So it wasn't about Josiah. It was about Scott and Sarah. Because it wasn't meant to be, and he was there with us. He understood. He got me. And he knows what it's like to be separated. Because of death, he gets us. Because that happened with him. Number 3 says, do not suppress grief. Allow for times to grieve fully. One of my favorite pastors in Omaha, he's the one that did pastoral care, kind of like our Gary, who's just a younger version with worse hair than Gary. Gary's cool, dude. I used to make fun of Pastor Dave. I'm like, you're living in the 80s. What do we have? Flat tops back then, remember? He still has a flat top to this day. Yeah, he cracks me up. But I remember I called Pastor Dave one time, my first funeral I did when I was here. And I called him, and it was a friend of mine that had died. And he left 4 little kids along with the wife. And I was like, Dave, what do I do? It's not like they were married 70 years and they're both, elderly and the kids are grown. It's like all 4 little kids. I had to wake him up and tell them. And he just, I said, well, how would I help them? And he said, tell them to grieve fully and thoroughly, but don't get stuck. I'm like, God doesn't help me none. I want steps A through Z. And he's like, Scott, they're individual human beings. And you're one that's supposed to help them walk through. But they have to grieve fully and thoroughly, but they just can't get stuck. Don't let them stand in the middle of the mud pit and never move again. And I remember telling him that. And you know what? To see the Lord's handiwork in their lives over all these years, these 7 years later, it's an amazing thing. And to watch them live out freedom and give it away, It's an amazing thing. They grieved fully and thoroughly, and they didn't get stuck, and now they're giving life away. We have to have permission to grieve. God gives it to us. The Bible's full of him telling us we have permission to walk things through. For yourself and for others, we're all going to grieve in different ways, but we got to walk it through. I love the Green Book because they all look alike inside, but your issue and your responses are all going to be unique. So walk it through and process it. Forgive. If forgiveness is a part of the loss, forgive, because sometimes it's a spouse that leaves and you have to forgive and deal with the loss at the same time. It's a dad who abandoned. It's a boss who said, no, you're not worth this promotion, and I want to get rid of you. And you have to deal with that stuff. And then we have to repent where it's needed. Where we have taken things, we've either lived in pain, we've lived in bitterness, or we've gotten spiteful out of it. We have to repent. And repentance is so joy-filled. Man, I love to walk in repentance. It brings me life every time. Fellowship is huge. Close friends are needed. That's what I was talking about earlier with this group of people. The body, the church, the Fresh Start group. And then submission to the regular times of worship is key, because we're not called to live life alone. We're not solo artists in the kingdom. We're called to do this with one another, and that's where we get to bear up one another's burdens. And grief is a burden. Grief is heavy. So let's let people help us walk it out. So just look at the application there as we wrap up. There's 4 parts there. The first one's pretty cut and dry there. Is there anything in your life that you never fully grieved? You'll know that. Do you feel stuck because of it? And I'll just say this. If there's something you've never fully grieved and you don't think you're stuck, you've probably gone to some place where you've cut something off that doesn't see with reality there, because something is stuck because of it. It might be that you're just stuck in giving your life away or living in fullness. You might not be this person who just lives as a shut-in, but maybe you're like, oh, I don't trust anyone anymore. You're stuck. So let him unstick you by setting you free. And if you answer yes to that first one, yeah, there's something I've never fully grieved. In fact, there's 7 somethings. Put them all in here on the one side where it has losses, where you list in part 1, and then just go down them. Just either pick one that stands out the most, or just systematically go down each one at a time and go out of here. If you have 7 of them, go out of here with 7 green books. It is okay, and you're going to be set free. B says, are you willing to share with a trusted person? This gets a little personal for you, because the first one you just answer for yourself. You're like, yeah, 7 things. Second one says, are you willing to take those 7 things, in essence, and share with a trusted person what these are in order to make yourself accountable to overcome grief? If not, why not? And I get when it's hard. The enemy will want you to live in the not, and then give you 100 reasons why not that are logical. And Jesus is saying, I've come to set you free indeed. That I died on the cross. It's for freedom that I died and set you free. So would you walk in that? Part C has this, refer back to part D, the practical steps of grieving. Would you be willing to step into those in order to resolve those things that you listed, or that thing that you listed? And then, this is the glory to the Lord stuff. Each week as you do the practical steps, would you be willing to share with someone you trust about how this is going? And it may be weeks 1 and 2 feels like you're dipping down a little bit. Well, it feels worse. I had somebody one time, they're like, Scott, if I deal with that, it's just going to get worse for like a year. And I'm like, yeah, but then from years 2 till death, it's only going to be better. And he's like, I can't survive that year. And I'm like, you can. And you know what? He's still living in that I'm unwilling moment. 8 years later, hasn't changed. I love this person, and I see him a lot. Still there. He can't fathom that dip down before the uprise. But what's so cool is if you're willing to share this with somebody you trust how it's going, even if it's tough at first, you begin to tell about the glorious things, the thankful things, the grateful things, and all of a sudden you look back and you're like, that was a long time ago and way down there, and I'm living here now. Man, that's awesome. And you're telling your Fresh Start story. You're unique, specific, fresh start story of how you dealt with loss. It keeps you in submission with God and in fellowship with one another when you do that too. It keeps people involved in your life and you're giving Jesus away.